Imagine logging into your bank account right now. You type in your password, you hit enter, and you look up at the corner of your browser.
You're looking for that little padlock icon.
Exactly. You see that reassuring little padlock appear. And, I mean, for most of us, that padlock is a promise, right?
Right. It's the universal symbol for safety.
Yeah, it's the digital equivalent of a bank vault. It tells you that your data is encrypted, it's secure, and it's completely invisible to, well, anyone else in the network. But, and this is a big but what if I told you that a machine sitting in a laboratory, half a world away, just snapped that padlock in half without even breaking a sweat?
It's a sobering thought because it shatters the entire illusion of our digital privacy. I mean, we operate under this assumption that our current cryptographic standards are permanent. But mathematically speaking, they are incredibly fragile.
Usually when we talk about security, we think in terms of physical engineering.
Like building a thicker wall.
Right. You build a thicker wall, you get a heavier vault door, and if there's a crack in that wall, you just use an X-ray or a stress test to find it. It's clear as day.
But the digital world doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. Today, the X-ray machine of our digital security is basically broken. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. And those walls we thought were made of solid steel. They're actually made of glass.
And that glass is unfortunately about to meet a resonant frequency that will shatter it completely.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission for today's deep dive is to untangle the mind-bending intersection of three massive domains. We're talking quantum mechanics, artificial intelligence, and global cybersecurity.
It's a massive convergence.
It really is. And we are looking at a stack of intensely complex, cutting-edge sources today. First, we've got a technical paper straight out of Physical Review X detailing this massive breakthrough in quantum memories from the ICFO Institute in Barcelona.
A really fascinating paper, yeah.
Then we have a comprehensive and honestly pretty sobering report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. That one analyzes the geopolitical race for quantum supremacy.
Which is heating up faster than most people realize.
Definitely. We're also dissecting some IE and privacy reports on the impending cybersecurity threat known as Q-Day. And finally, we are diving into some truly wild theoretical papers, including one from preprints.org on quantum-informed cybernetics and the Cognitor project.
Which sounds like science fiction.
It sounds exactly like science fiction, but they're engineering it today.
What is vital to understand right from the start, though, is that these are not isolated academic exercises.
Right.
We aren't just talking about abstract physics on a chalkboard. We are looking at the foundational pieces of a global puzzle. A puzzle that will redefine national security, rewrite the literal speed limits of human communication, and, well, eventually force us to question the boundary between a machine network and a living biological ecosystem.
So I want to start with the most immediate visceral threat to you, the listener. Because whenever someone says the phrase quantum mechanics, people instantly think of, like, sterile labs and liquid nitrogen.
Equations that take up a whole wall.
Exactly. It feels entirely disconnected from your morning commute or, your private medical records. But we have to talk about Q-Day. Because Q-Day is about your biometric data. It's about your private messages. It is a ticking clock.
It really is. And Q-Day is the term that cybersecurity experts and intelligence agencies use to describe a very specific impending moment in time.
A finish line of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. It is the day when a practical, functioning quantum computer achieves enough stable processing power to execute algorithms that completely defeat our current public key encryption standards.
And just to be clear, we are talking about the algorithms that secure essentially 100% of the open internet right now, right?
Yes, primarily RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC.
And we actually have a timeline for this. This isn't some nebulous flying cars in the year 3000 type of prediction.
Far from it. According to projections from NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, along with Gartner, quantum computers could realistically reach the capability to break RSA 2048 encryption by the year 2029.
2029. That's just a few years away.
Yes, and they project full systemic decryption capabilities across various standards by 2034.
Okay, 2029 is right around the corner. So let's break down the mechanics of this because I want to make sure we understand why this happens.
Sure.
When I see that padlock, we talked about the HTTPS in my browser that relies on transport layer security, TLS.
Right.
And TLS uses RSA to securely hand off a secret key between my computer and the bank's server. Why is a quantum computer able to break that RSA math when a regular, massive supercomputer can't?
It comes down to the nature of the math we use to hide things. RSA encryption relies on what are called a one-way mathematical function.
Right.
Specifically, it uses prime factorization. Now, if I give a classical computer two massive prime numbers, it can multiply them together in a fraction of a millisecond. It gets an even larger number.
Right. Multiplication is easy.
Exactly. But if I give a classical computer that massive resulting number and say, find the two prime numbers I multiplied to get this, it is incredibly difficult.
Because it essentially has to guess, right?
Yes. A classical supercomputer has to guess and check, dividing by prime after prime. And for a 2048-bit RSA key, that guessing game would take a classical computer longer than the current age of our universe.
Okay, so we feel safe because literally the sun will burn out before a hacker's laptop guesses the password.
Right.
But a quantum computer doesn't guess and check, does it?
No, it doesn't. And this is where a brilliant piece of mathematics called Shor's algorithm comes in.
Shor's algorithm, okay.
So a classical computer uses bits, ones, and zeros to process one possibility at a time. A quantum computer uses qubits, and qubits can exist in a state of superposition.
Meaning they are ones and zeros at the same time.
Essentially, yes. They represent complex probabilities of ones and zeros simultaneously. So Shor's algorithm doesn't blindly guess the factors. Instead, it uses the quantum properties of interference.
Interference, like sound waves.
Very much like waves, yes.
Yeah.
It maps the mathematical problem into a quantum state where all the incorrect answers cancel each other out. Imagine waves crashing into each other and just flattening the water.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, the correct answers amplify each other. It finds the hidden period or pattern in the numbers.
So it bypasses the entire guessing game.
Okay.
It just isolates the mathematical structure of the encryption and pulls the prime numbers out.
Yes, Shor's algorithm gives an exponential speedup, a process that takes a classical computer billions of years, takes a sufficiently powerful quantum computer a matter of hours or even minutes.
Minutes. That's insane.
And the moment that happens, the session keys protecting your bank login, your emails, your medical records, they are all visible in plain text to anyone monitoring the connection.
And it's not just banking either. Our sources explicitly highlight cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum, they rely on something called ECDSA, right?
The elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, yes.
And is that the same math?
Well, elliptic curve math is slightly different from prime factorization, but it suffers from the exact same vulnerability to Shor's algorithm.
So it's just as doomed.
Completely.
Yeah.
If a quantum computer cracks ECDSA, the core security of the blockchain simply evaporates. Hackers wouldn't just be able to steal funds. They could forge digital signatures, impersonate users, or theoretically even rewrite transaction histories.
The entire trust mechanism of decentralized finance would just collapse overnight.
Precisely.
No, I need to stop you here, because I know there are network engineers listening right now who are screaming at their phones saying, what about AES-256? We use AES-256 for military-grade encryption. It's what encrypts the actual hard drives and the bulk data. Does Shor's algorithm obliterate that too?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and the answer is no.
Okay, good.
AES-256 is what we call a symmetric key cipher. It doesn't use prime factorization or elliptic curves to hide the data. It uses a really complex process of substituting and shuffling the data in multiple rounds.
The Shor's algorithm is useless against it.
Completely useless. The best weapon a quantum computer has against AES is a different piece of math called Grover's algorithm.
And how does Grover's algorithm work compared to Shor's?
Grover's algorithm is essentially a highly optimized quantum search engine. It uses a technique called amplitude amplification to search through an unsorted database.
Okay.
But unlike Shor's, which gives an exponential speedup, Grover's only gives a quadratic speedup.
A quadratic speedup. I'm going to need you to ground that in reality for me.
Uh-huh.
What does a quadratic speedup actually mean for a hacker trying to steal my data?
It basically means it cuts the cryptographic strength in half. So attacking AES-256 with a quantum computer using Grover's algorithm is the equivalent of attacking AES-128 with a classical computer.
And AES-128 is still secure.
Oh, yes. It's still considered practically unbreakable by brute force. A brute force attack against AES-256 using Grover's algorithm is still so gigantically resource-intensive that it remains secure. So the sky is not falling on symmetric encryption.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the architecture here, the vault itself, which is AES-256, is still incredibly strong. But the armored car we use to deliver the key to the vault over the internet, which is RSA, that armored car is completely compromised.
That's a perfect way to look at it, yes.
But here is the truly terrifying part from our sources. The threat isn't just sitting in the future waiting for 2029 to roll around. It is actively happening right now through a strategy called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later.
This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the whole quantum transition. Adversaries, and we mean state actors, intelligence agencies, or sophisticated cyber syndicates, they are currently intercepting and hoarding massive amounts of encrypted global internet traffic.
They're just sitting on the lines.
Yes, they're physically tapping the fiber optic lines and copying the data packets as they fly by.
And our sources reference the Edward Snowden disclosures for this, right? Which provided hard evidence of how agencies like the NSA capture and keep vast amounts of global traffic. We're talking diplomatic cables, military communications, proprietary corporate IP, and just normal personal data.
Exactly. And they know perfectly well they cannot read it today. The encryption holds today. But storage is incredibly cheap.
Right. You can buy terabytes of storage for nothing.
So they are building massive data centers to stockpile this unreadable encrypted traffic, because they are confident that when Q-Day arrives, they will just run Shor's algorithm against the stockpile.
And decades of secrets will suddenly simultaneously be unlocked.
Yes. Every intercepted secret from the past 20 years will be an open book.
And for you listening, I want you to think about what you transmitted yesterday. Think about your GDPR or CCPA biometric consent form.
Think about your medical history.
Yes. Think about the genomic data you sent to an Ancestry website or the health telemetry your smartwatch syncs to the cloud. Our privacy reports note that IoT edge devices like smartwatches and medical monitors, they often lack heavy encryption because of battery constraints, so they rely on the very protocols that will be broken.
The fallout really is staggering. Breached consent data isn't just a stolen credit card that you can call your bank and cancel. It's your immutable biometric data. You can't change your DNA or your fingerprints.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
Exposing entire user histories could lead to highly targeted identity theft, corporate espionage, or even discrimination based on private health data that was intercepted a decade prior. It is a ticking time bomb.
So the obvious solution is to just update the encryption, right?
Yeah.
We just move to math that quantum computers can't break. And I know this is called post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
Right.
But the IE report we have outlines why this is an absolute nightmare. It's not just a quick software patch you download overnight. We're talking about backfitting billions of devices globally.
And post-quantum cryptography relies on entirely new branches of mathematics, things like lattice-based cryptography.
Okay, explain lattice-based math to me. Because if prime factorization is dead, what is this new shield actually made of?
Imagine a grid like graph paper, but instead of 2 dimensions, it has thousands of dimensions.
Thousands. Okay, my brain hurts already.
Exactly. A lattice-based algorithm essentially hides the encryption key at a specific intersection point in this massive hyperdimensional grid. And then it introduces a tiny amount of mathematical noise to obscure the exact location.
Okay, so it fuzzes the coordinates.
Yes. So finding the key requires navigating this massive multidimensional geometric maze. And as far as we currently understand physics and mathematics, neither classical nor quantum computers have an efficient algorithm to solve this shortest vector problem in a high-dimensional lattice.
That sounds brilliant, honestly. But the problem isn't the map itself, it's the implementation. The IEE source points out that this is a dual-front war. Because while we are scrambling to roll out this incredibly complex lattice math, we also have generative AI entering the chat.
Generative AI acts as a massive force multiplier for cyber threats.
How so?
Well, while we are worried about the future mathematical power of quantum computing, generative AI is radically lowering the barrier to entry for cyber attacks today. It mass produces highly evasive malware, synthetic identities, and hyper-personalized phishing campaigns.
All designed to steal credentials before we can even upgrade the systems.
Exactly.
So if I'm picturing this right, generative AI is like an automated lock-picking robot factory. It's just churning out millions of specialized adaptive lockpicks to quietly attack the seams of our current defenses.
Right.
While the rest of us sit around nervously staring at the horizon, waiting for the massive quantum battering ram to arrive on Q-Day.
That is exactly the dynamic, but it's actually even more intertwined than that. Generative AI is actively being used by threat actors to model and experiment with vulnerabilities in the new post-quantum cryptography algorithms we are desperately trying to deploy.
Wait, really? They're attacking the new math already?
Yes. AI is training reinforcement learning agents to optimize what we call side channel attacks.
What's a side channel attack?
Well, instead of attacking the complex lattice math directly, a side-channel attack looks at the physical hardware running the math. It measures how much power the microchip consumes, or it measures the electromagnetic radiation it emits, or exactly how many milliseconds it takes to process the encryption.
So it's looking for leaks in the physical process.
Yes. And generative AI is brilliant at finding patterns in that physical noise to extract the encryption key without ever having to solve the lattice math.
Which makes me want to seriously push back on this whole PQC transition plan.
Yeah.
I mean, migrating to PQC requires backfitting hardware across global critical infrastructure. We need recertifications. We have to ensure interoperability between legacy systems and new quantum systems.
It's a logistical nightmare.
Right. And if the bad guys already have Gen AI actively hunting for flaws in the algorithms we haven't even finished installing, aren't we already too late?
This raises an important question, and that exact fear is why the cybersecurity community is urging a shift away from just upgrading algorithms to an entirely new paradigm called crypto agility.
Crypto agility.
We can no longer hard-code encryption into systems. We have to design network architectures where the encryption algorithm is basically a plug-and-play module, something that can be swapped out instantly the moment a vulnerability is found.
Got it.
And it requires shifting to zero-trust architecture, operating under the assumption that the network is already breached. But the current state of readiness is incredibly sobering. One of our sources notes that only 13% of enterprises have even begun their PQC migrations.
13%. That leaves an unimaginable volume of data completely exposed to that hardest now decrypt later strategy.
It is a literal race against time.
And that perfectly brings us to the geopolitical reality of this technology. Because this race isn't just happening between corporate IT departments and rogue hacker syndicates. The race to reach quantum supremacy first is a full-blown clash of superpowers.
It really is.
Based on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission report we reviewed, this is the defining technological Cold War of our era.
The stakes outlined in that report cannot be overstated. The first nation to scale quantum technology isn't just going to build a faster laptop. They will gain irreversible strategic superiority.
Across the board.
Yes. We are talking about the absolute ability to break a rival's digital economy. They'll achieve transformative leaps in materials science, like discovering room temperature superconductors or new battery chemistries in days instead of decades. And they will gain disproportionate advantages in signals intelligence.
Now, I want to be very clear for you listening. We're looking at this strictly through the lens of the source material. We are acting as impartial reporters of this U.S. Commission report, examining the contrasting strategies without taking any political stance whatsoever.
Just looking at the approaches.
Exactly. But the strategic divergence between the two is utterly fascinating. The U.S. and China are taking radically different philosophical approaches to winning this race. So let's examine the Chinese model first.
The Chinese model is highly centralized. It is state-led and heavily subsidized. It's driven from the very top down, specifically guided by their 13th and 14th five-year plans.
So it's a massive national priority.
Absolutely. They do not view quantum research as a peripheral scientific endeavor. They have elevated it to the level of a national mega project. This involves the deliberate, tight integration of government ministries, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, state-owned enterprises, and elite academic institutions.
And what's really striking in the report is their focus on massive, tangible, physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
The report highlights the Mushis satellite. I mean, this isn't just theoretical physics on paper. They launched a literal satellite into orbit that successfully distributed entangled photons to ground stations over 1,200 kilometers apart.
Which is a staggering engineering achievement. Maintaining fragile quantum entanglement through the atmospheric interference from low Earth orbit is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I can't even get decent Wi-Fi in my kitchen sometimes.
Exactly. And furthermore, they have built a literal physical quantum communication backbone. It's a massive fiber optic network stretching securely between Beijing and Shanghai.
And they have that quantum avenue, right?
Yes, in the city of Hefei. They established it to aggressively cluster startups, supply chains, and research labs all in one geographic location.
So their centralized approach has arguably made China the undisputed global leader in quantum communications infrastructure right now. But they are also making terrifyingly rapid progress in computing itself.
Yes, they are.
The report details the Zhuzhang photonic quantum computer, which was developed by the University of Science and Technology of China. It performed a task called boson sampling in 200 seconds. And for context, the report estimates a classical supercomputer would take 500 million years to do the same task.
200 seconds versus 500 million years?
Right. But wait, before we move on, explain boson sampling to me, because that sounds like magic. What is the machine actually doing?
Okay, imagine a massive, complex pegboard, like a Plinko game from The Price is Right.
Oh, I love Plinko. Okay.
But instead of pegs, it's built out of microscopic optical beam splitters and mirrors. In boson sampling, you fire dozens of individual photons, which are bosons, into this maze simultaneously.
Okay.
The photons bounce around, they interfere with each other, and eventually they exit at various detectors at the bottom. Now, for a classical computer to predict the probability distribution of exactly where all those photons will land, it has to calculate every single possible path and interference pattern simultaneously.
Which I'm guessing gets complicated fast.
The math scales exponentially. At around 50 or 60 photons, it becomes mathematically impossible for the biggest classical supercomputer on Earth to calculate. It just chokes.
But the Juzang computer did it.
Well, the Juzang computer doesn't calculate the paths mathematically. It just physically fires the photons through the optical maze and measures where they land. The quantum system is simply being itself. It naturally resolves a problem that classical math chokes on.
That is brilliant. It's like trying to calculate the exact fluid dynamics of a river over 1 million years using a computer versus just dropping a leaf in the actual water and watching where it naturally goes.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. And in addition to that photonic approach, they also have the Zhuangzi superconducting quantum computer. However, the commission report does note distinct caveats to the Chinese model.
What kind of caveats?
It highlights their military-civil fusion policy. This mandate ensures that scientific breakthroughs have direct, uninhibited pathways to military application and procurement. It also points out that while China heavily promotes its milestones, its research ecosystem is highly opaque.
So we don't really know what's happening behind closed doors.
Right. The deliberate restriction of international collaboration makes independent, peer-reviewed verification of their claims incredibly difficult.
Now, contrast that opacity and centralization with the United States model.
Yeah.
The U.S. approach is decentralized. It's ecosystem-driven and fundamentally market-led. It's governed broadly by the National Quantum Initiative Act, but the actual innovation relies on this vast, kind of chaotic open network. You have federal agencies like the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and NIST, and they are operating alongside elite universities and massive commercial tech giants.
Companies like Google, IBM, Amazon.
Right. And critically, there's a robust ecosystem of highly specialized, venture-backed startups, like Atom Computing, which the report mentions recently surpassed the 1,000 qubit threshold.
So it's a battle of innovation philosophies. You have China's state-directed brute force infrastructure scaling on one side versus the U.S.'s distributed market-driven trial and error ecosystem on the other.
It's fascinating.
What is really interesting from an analytical perspective is how these philosophies map directly to the technological outcomes. The U.S. model's distributed structure might prove significantly more adept at capturing the convergence of AI and quantum tech.
Because there's so many different players mixing things up.
Exactly. You have thousands of different commercial entities freely experimenting, pivoting, and combining technologies in novel ways to find a market fit. But China's top-down command structure excels at rapidly deploying massive targeted physical infrastructure like that Beijing-Shanghai backbone.
Yeah, the commercial diversity in the U.S. is really apparent when you look at the taxonomy of how they are trying to build these computers. Because unlike a silicon microchip where the whole world agrees on the basic semiconductor physics, nobody actually knows the best way to build a qubit.
Not yet, no.
The U.S. has companies placing massive financial bets on entirely different laws of physics.
It is a remarkable diversification of risk. You have Google and IBM focusing on superconducting circuits, which require chilling metals to near absolute zero, so electrical current flows without resistance.
Which is incredibly hard to maintain.
Very hard. Then you have companies pursuing photonic computers using light, similar to the Juzang machine. You have trapped ion systems that use lasers to levitate individual atoms in an electromagnetic vacuum.
Sounds like sci-fi again.
It does. You have neutral atom approaches using optical tweezers, and you have Microsoft taking a massive, highly risky bet on topological qubits.
What are topological qubits?
They rely on theoretical quasi-particles called anyons. These anyons weave around each other to store information, which makes them theoretically immune to environmental noise.
So nobody actually knows which horse is going to win the race to a fault-tolerant scalable machine.
Exactly. That diversity is the defining strength of the U.S. ecosystem. But it also means financial and intellectual resources are distributed across multiple paradigms rather than concentrated on a single state-mandated path.
Now, I want to push back on a very specific, glaring strategic divergence mentioned in these reports.
Yeah.
We talked about how China is spending billions building massive physical quantum networks. The satellite, the Beijing-Shanghai fiber optic backbone.
Right.
And this infrastructure is based on a technology called quantum key distribution, or QKD. But the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, has explicitly issued guidance against using QKD for national security systems. They are aggressively pushing for the math-based post-quantum cryptography we talked about earlier.
They are.
So my question is, if China is building this supposedly unbreakable physics-based quantum shield, why is the NSA looking at it and saying, no thanks, we'll stick to the math?
It's a brilliant question, and it cuts to the core of the engineering realities versus theoretical physics. The NSA's hesitation doesn't stem from the physics of QKD. The physics are absolutely sound.
Okay.
Their hesitation stems from the brutal infrastructure realities of deploying it. QKD requires dedicated, highly specialized optical fiber. You cannot easily run a fragile quantum signal over the same noisy fiber optic cable that is carrying standard internet traffic.
So you can't just piggyback on existing lines.
No. And laying new, dedicated dark fiber across the entire United States is economically unfeasible.
So it's an infrastructure nightmare.
And a security nightmare, ironically.
How so?
Because photons naturally degrade over distance in a fiber optic cable, QKD currently requires trusted relay nodes every 50 to 100 kilometers.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of nodes.
These nodes have to catch the quantum signal, convert it to classical data, and then retransmit it as a new quantum signal. The NSA points out that every single one of those relay nodes is a massive insider threat vulnerability. If an adversary compromises just one relay node, the entire unbreakable quantum shield is useless.
They just siphon the data right out of the middle.
Exactly. Ultimately, QKD doesn't easily integrate into the software-defined, highly flexible network architectures the U.S. military and commercial sectors prefer. The NSA believes that math-based PQC, despite the risk of the math eventually being solved, is infinitely more practical, scalable, and cost-effective to deploy as software patches across existing global networks.
So China is betting the house on the fundamental laws of physics with dedicated, hardwired infrastructure. And the U.S. is betting on highly complex new mathematics running over our existing cables. And for you listening, this isn't some abstract debate. Whichever approach proves more resilient will become the foundational architecture of the internet you use for the rest of your life.
Which naturally requires us to ask, how exactly does this physical quantum network actually work? What makes QKD theoretically unbreakable? And what is the massive scientific roadblock that is preventing it from covering the globe right now?
Let's get into the mechanics of the shield. Quantum key distribution. How is it fundamentally different from the lattice math we just discussed?
Traditional encryption, even the new post-quantum lattice math, relies on computational complexity.
Meaning the math is just too hard to solve.
Right. You encrypt a file, send it, and the receiver uses a key to unlock it. An eavesdropper can intercept that data all day long. They can store it in a server farm. They just can't read it because the math is too hard. But if they eventually find a mathematical shortcut or build a big enough computer, they can read it.
Right.
QKD is fundamentally different. It doesn't use math to hide the data. It uses the physical properties of single photons of light to transmit the encryption key.
And this relies entirely on the concept of superposition, right?
Yes. In standard QKD protocols, like the BB84 protocol developed by Bennett and Broussard, the sender, let's call her Alice, codes the encryption key into the polarization state of individual photons.
Okay, polarization. You like polarized sunglasses.
Exactly. She might send a photon that is polarized vertically or horizontally or diagonally. And because it's a quantum system, until that photon is measured, its exact state is fragile and undetermined.
So Alice sends these fragile photons down a fiber optic cable to Bob. Now let's introduce Eve, the eavesdropper. Eve has tapped the cable and she wants to read the key. What happens when she tries to look at the photons as they fly by?
This is where the Heisenberg uncertainty principle comes into play. The sheer act of Eve measuring the photon to see its polarization irreversibly alters its quantum state.
It breaks it.
It collapses the wave function, yes. So when Bob receives the photons, he and Alice compare a small subset of their data over a public channel. If Eve has been listening, Alice and Bob will immediately detect a massive spike in the error rate because Eve's observations inherently scrambled the photons.
They will know with absolute certainty that the line is tapped.
Exactly. They simply discard that compromised key and try again. QKD makes covert wiretapping physically impossible. The laws of physics dictate that observation leaves a trace.
That is mind-blowing, and the applications of that are wild. The sources mention using QKD for submarine cables, allowing communication to the bottom of the ocean that is completely immune to interception. But the most staggering application comes from the paper by Dr. Reggie Kurian-Thomas on quantum node communication. He is exploring how entanglement could effectively break the speed of light barrier for communication.
Yes, Dr. Thomas's paper explores the entanglement-based E91 protocol. Entanglement is the phenomenon Einstein famously derided as spooky action at a distance.
Right, because it defied classical physics.
Exactly. If two particles are entangled, their quantum states are mathematically and physically linked, regardless of the physical distance between them. If you measure the polarization of a photon here in a lab on Earth and it collapses into a spin-up state, its entangled partner, even if it is currently in orbit around Mars, will instantaneously collapse into the corresponding spin-down state.
Instantaneously. Not traveling at the speed of light. Zero latency.
Correct. Dr. Thomas points out the limitations of classical radio communication. Sending a radio signal to a rover on Mars takes anywhere from 4 to 24 minutes, depending on orbital alignments. A signal to Alpha Centauri takes over 4 years.
Which makes real-time control impossible.
Exactly. But if we can build stable communication nodes using entangled particles, we could theoretically achieve real-time, zero-latency state transfer across interstellar distances. He outlines experimental setups where this protocol was tested successfully over 1,000 meters, proving the integrity of the data correlation.
It fundamentally changes how we think about space exploration, or even, global financial high-frequency trading, where a single millisecond delay costs millions of dollars. But let's bring this back down to Earth. Building a physical quantum internet right now faces a massive fundamental hurdle. It's a physics problem called the rate-loss trade-off.
And this is the core issue with sending single photons through glass fiber optic cables.
Because the glass isn't perfect.
Exactly. Even the purest glass absorbs some light. As the photon travels further, the probability of it being absorbed or lost to environmental noise increases exponentially. In a normal classical internet cable, this is easy to fix. We just install an optical amplifier every 50 kilometers.
Like a repeater station.
Right. The amplifier takes the fading light signal, copies it, and blasts out a stronger version.
But you can't amplify a quantum signal.
No, you cannot. And the reason is another fundamental law of quantum mechanics called the no-cloning theorem.
Meaning you can't copy a qubit.
You cannot perfectly copy an unknown quantum state. If you try to amplify the photon, you have to measure it, which destroys that delicate superposition we talked about earlier. So as distance increases, the rate at which you can successfully generate a key drops to essentially zero. This is the rate-loss trade-off.
So how do you cross an ocean if you can't amplify the signal?
You need a theoretical device called a quantum repeater. A quantum repeater doesn't copy the photon. It uses a really complex process to take two shorter entangled links and stitch them together into one longer entangled link without ever measuring the core information.
Okay.
But to build a quantum repeater, you need a highly efficient quantum memory. You need a physical substance that can catch a fragile quantum state, hold it perfectly stable for a few milliseconds while the network syncs up, and then release it on demand.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because our source from Physical Review X, published by researchers at the ICFO Institute in Barcelona, details a massive concrete breakthrough in exactly this area. A team led by Jonathan Henney and Professor Hughes de Riedmatten have actually implemented a proof-of-principle entangled link between two solid-state quantum memories.
It is a phenomenal piece of experimental physics. They didn't just use a cloud of cold gas in a vacuum chamber, which is what previous experiments often did. They used a specific type of solid-state memory, a crystal doped with rare earth ions, specifically praseodymium.
Stop there for a second. What does doped mean in this context? Because I'm trying to visualize this crystal.
Imagine a perfectly structured, transparent crystal lattice. Doping means they intentionally introduce microscopic impurities into that perfect structure.
Okay, they're mixing something in.
Yes. They swap out some of the normal atoms in the crystal for rare earth ions, and these rare earth ions have unique electron configurations that allow them to interact very specifically with single photons of light.
So the crystal is essentially a specialized sponge for catching light. How did they actually create the entanglement?
They set up two of these crystal memories at separate nodes. At each node, they use a laser to generate a pair of entangled photons.
Okay, 2 pairs total.
Right. One photon of the pair is absorbed and stored within the rare earth ions of the crystal. The other photon is mathematically converted to a telecom wavelength, that's the standard color of light used in everyday internet fiber optics, and sent down a cable to a central measuring station.
So you have 2 photons traveling from separate labs to a central point, while their entangled partners are basically held hostage inside the crystals.
Exactly. When those two traveling photons arrive at the central station, they are subjected to a specific type of measurement called a Bell state measurement. And this measurement is designed to completely erase any physical information about which node the photons originated from.
And because quantum mechanics is incredibly weird, the act of erasing their origin information actually entangles the 2 photons that are still sitting inside the crystals miles away.
Yes. The measurement forces the entire system into a shared quantum state. What makes the ICFO study so groundbreaking is 2 things. First, they demonstrated the ability to store this entanglement and retrieve it on demand.
Which was the missing piece for the repeater.
Exactly. But second, and most importantly, their rare earth-doped crystals possess an incredibly high capacity for something called time multiplexing.
Time multiplexing. Okay, explain this mechanism because the paper makes a huge deal out of it.
To understand time multiplexing, let's look at the problem it solves. Generating entanglement is a highly probabilistic process. Most of the time, the photon gets lost, or the measurement just fails. If your quantum memory can only attempt to catch a photon in one specific microsecond time slot, and it fails, you have to wait and try again.
Which makes it incredibly slow.
Very slow.
Yeah.
Time multiplexing means the crystal can handle multiple time slots simultaneously.
I'm trying to think of an analogy. Okay, let's say I'm trying to buy a highly coveted concert ticket, and the website keeps crashing. If there's only one single ticket window open and the transaction fails, I have to go to the back of a massive line and wait hours to try again. The rate of success is terrible.
Right.
But time multiplexing is like suddenly opening 10,000 parallel ticket windows at the exact same time.
Yeah.
So even if 9,900 of those windows crash, I still secured 100 tickets in that exact same millisecond.
That is a brilliant analogy. The rare earth ions in the crystal have an inhomogeneous broadening profile, meaning different ions absorb slightly different frequencies of light. This allows the researchers to slice a single beam of light into multiple distinct time and frequency bins.
So they're running parallel channels.
They can attempt to generate entanglement across hundreds of different windows simultaneously within the very same crystal. This massively increases the rate at which entanglement is successfully distributed, which directly combats that rate-loss trade-off. The ICFO researchers explicitly noted that with this performance, a quantum repeater link of a few kilometers is feasible with current technology, and further optical cavity enhancements could push it to connecting distant cities.
Okay, so we have the physical building blocks. The crystals work. But I want to play devil's advocate here for a second, drawing on our privacy sources and the Wikipedia analysis of QKD's vulnerabilities. You said earlier that QKD is provably secure because any observation destroys the state. Doesn't that extreme sensitivity make the entire network incredibly fragile? I mean, the sources note that QKD dramatically increases the risk of denial of service attacks. If I'm a hostile state actor, I don't need to break your complex math to cripple your communication. I just need to continuously shine a light or tap your fiber optic cable. Every time I tap it, the laws of physics shut your connection down to protect it.
It's a feature that acts as a bug.
It sounds like installing a billion-dollar, ultra-secure alarm system that permanently locks you out of your own house just because a leaf blew past the motion sensor.
And you have just articulated the exact reason the NSA prefers math. The theoretical security model of QKD relies on extreme perfect sensitivity. But in the real world, fiber optic cables are buried under highways. They experience temperature fluctuations and they vibrate from passing trucks.
They're messy.
Very messy. Differentiating between ambient environmental noise that naturally degrades a photon and a sophisticated eavesdropper trying to intercept it is incredibly difficult. An adversary could simply flood the line with optical noise.
And the system would just panic.
The system would constantly detect eavesdropping, trigger the wave function collapse, and continuously shut down the channel. That is a devastating denial of service attack against critical infrastructure.
So the physics ensure it is perfectly secure but perfectly unusable if someone is actively messing with it.
Exactly. And furthermore, while the equations of quantum mechanics are flawless, the hardware we build to execute them is not. The photon detectors, the lasers, the beam splitters, they all have physical imperfections. Hackers have actually successfully demonstrated what are called blinding attacks.
Oh, blinding attack.
They shine a bright, continuous classical laser into the sensitive single photon detector. This overwhelms the detector, forcing it to act like a classical machine and blinding its quantum capability.
Oh, wow.
This allows the hacker to bypass the quantum security entirely without ever triggering the alarm.
Wow. So the physics is unbreakable, but the engineering implementation is full of holes, which perfectly explains why the US and China are placing such radically different bets. But regardless of whether we use math or physics to secure the pipes, the breakthroughs in quantum memory from ICFO mean that quantum networks are coming. We are moving from equations on a chalkboard to the actual physical infrastructure that will carry your data.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, as we build this new infrastructure, the very nature of the networks themselves is going to undergo a paradigm shift. We are moving toward an era where the network isn't just a static pipe carrying ones and zeros, it is becoming a responsive, adaptive entity.
Which brings us to the final and undeniably most bizarre piece of our source stack today, synthetic life and Cogiter 5. We've talked about the threat to your data, we've talked about the geopolitical arms race, and we've talked about the physical crystals. Now we have to talk about the entities that are going to inhabit this future quantum internet.
The residents of the network, so to speak.
We're talking about the Internet of Things, the
Yeah.
IoT, but evolving on a level that honestly defies imagination.
Currently, our Internet of Things is a massive, sprawling network of discrete binary devices. Your smart thermostat, the connected sensors in a smart city grid, industrial robotics. But as these networks grow infinitely complex, traditional binary computing starts to buckle under the weight.
It's just too rigid.
Right. It simply cannot adapt fast enough to chaotic, unpredictable environmental changes. And this is where our source from preprints.org, written by Maurice Yoles and Alessandro Chialerio, introduces a revolutionary concept called quantum-informed cybernetics.
And they introduced this framework through a project called Cogitor. I am obsessed with the etymology they use here. They point out that Descartes famously said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Cogito is the active singular individual, I think. But the project is named Cogitor, which is the Latin passive verb, meaning he is gathered.
It explicitly shifts the focus from individual, localized intelligence to collective, gathered, distributed intelligence.
The Cogitor project is an attempt to engineer what they define as fifth-order cybernetics. And to even begin to understand what that means, you have to discard your mental image of what a computer looks like. The physical makeup of this system is not a silicon circuit board or a rigid microchip. It is a cyberfluid medium.
It's a liquid.
Yes. They are utilizing colloidal suspensions, essentially a liquid solvent that contains billions of solid nanoparticle agents. Specifically, they are using magnetic nanoparticles, all encased inside a soft, flexible, artificial skin.
So we are literally talking about a squishy liquid robot.
Liquid intelligence. But how does liquid actually compute anything?
This is where the quantum-informed aspect becomes vital, because these magnetic nanoparticles are so incredibly small, they operate at the nanoscale. And that is the exact threshold where classical physics begins to blur into quantum phenomena.
Right.
The researchers are utilizing the magnetic spin fluctuations of these nanoparticles. Even at room temperature, the magnetic poles of these particles are constantly interacting. They align, they repel, they form complex structures.
So they're communicating.
Yes. This creates a state of collective behavior. When you apply an external stimulus to the liquid, like a slight electric field, a magnetic pulse, or even just physical pressure on the artificial skin, these nanoparticles interact, self-organize, and respond as a collective whole.
The paper introduces a theoretical framework to map this behavior called mindset agency theory, or MAT-T. And they break down the functionality of this liquid intelligence into three profoundly human-sounding attributes: cognition, affect, and spirit. I need you to explain how a jar of magnetic liquid has cognition, affect, and spirit.
It requires looking at it through the lens of pure cybernetics. In this meta-cybernetic model, cognition does not imply human consciousness or conscious thought. Cognition refers strictly to the system's ability to process environmental data and execute decision-making algorithms based on the interactions of the nanoparticles.
Okay, so it's the data processing layer.
Yes. Affect refers to how the system responds to environmental stimuli in terms of arousal and valence.
Arousal and valence, like emotional states.
In a cybernetic sense, yes. It dictates how intensely the fluid reacts to a stimulus, and whether it seeks to stabilize that reaction or amplify it. It is the system's internal self-regulation and its sensitivity to its environment.
Okay, I can grasp data processing and environmental sensitivity.
Yeah.
But spirit, that sounds entirely metaphysical for a physics paper.
In the context of fifth-order cybernetics, spirit represents the overarching drive of the system for resilience, wholeness, and transcendence.
Transcendence.
It is the balancing, integrative force that mediates between the cognition and the affect. It ensures that the system doesn't just passively survive a changing environment, but actively adapts, reconfigures its own internal structure, and evolves beyond its initial constraints. It is the drive to maintain viability in a state of chaos.
To coordinate all of these moving parts, the researchers propose that the Cogiter 5 system relies on something called a metabosonic field and a continuous process called autosynesis.
Autosynesis translates to self-integration. It is the continuous dynamic process by which the fluid aggregates data from every single nanoparticle to maintain coherence across the entire liquid body.
So it knows what every part of itself is doing at all times.
Exactly. And the metabosonic field is the theoretical control layer that makes this possible. In quantum physics, bosons, like the photons we discussed earlier, are particles that can occupy the exact same quantum state simultaneously. This allows them to exhibit massive collective coherence, like a laser beam.
So the metabosonic field in this liquid isn't literal light, it's a structural principle.
Correct. It acts holographically. It synchronizes the macroscopic, classical physical movements of the fluid with the microscopic, quantum-inspired magnetic behaviors of the nanoparticles. It simulates a state of entanglement and superposition to ensure that billions of individual particles operate as one cohesive, adaptive entity.
The paper uses an analogy that really made this click for me, and it ties everything back to biology. Stem cells. If you think about a traditional IoT network, it is like a body made entirely of highly specialized cells. A smart thermostat is a skin cell. It only knows how to read temperature. A smart lock is a muscle cell. It only knows how to open and close.
And if the environment changes drastically or the system is attacked, they break.
Right, they cannot change what they are. But this cyberfluid cogiter medium is like a network comprised entirely of stem cells. The magnetic nanoparticles don't have a fixed permanent job. They can dynamically adapt, morph, and co-evolve to become whatever the network requires in that exact microsecond.
Exactly.
They can cluster together to sense pressure, they can alter their configuration to harvest thermal energy from the environment, they can align their spins to store encrypted data, and then a second later they can dissolve back into the fluid. We are literally engineering synthetic living ecosystems.
And the application of this, for you, the listener, is profound. Imagine the physical spaces you inhabit in the near future. Your smart home, the autonomous vehicle you ride in, the architecture of the building you work in. They won't be rigidly wired with static sensors and silicon chips.
They'll look alive.
They could be embedded with these cyberfluid ecosystems. The walls of your house could dynamically adjust their thermal conductivity based on the weather outside. They could heal their own structural microfractures after a storm, or instantly reconfigure their internal encryption pathways the moment Q-Day arrives. All because these nanoparticles are self-organizing and adapting to the environment like a living organism.
It is absolutely incredible. So let's pull all of this together because we have covered massive ground today. We started with the very real ticking clock of Q-Day, the impending moment in 2029 or 2034 when quantum computers use Shor's algorithm to shatter our current RSA encryption. A threat that is being drastically accelerated by the lock-picking factory of generative AI. We explored the intense geopolitical clash between the US and China to own this quantum realm, contrasting China's massive state-led physical infrastructure with the US's decentralized, market-driven ecosystem of diverse qubits. We dove deep into the mechanics of quantum key distribution, examining the rate-loss trade-off and the brilliant breakthroughs at ICFO, using rare earth-doped crystals to multiplex entanglement and make a physical quantum internet feasible. And finally, we peered into the weird, fluid future of synthetic collective intelligence with Cogiter 5, where our networks become liquid, stem cell-like organisms.
It is a staggering amount of technological convergence happening across multiple disciplines simultaneously.
So what does this all mean?
If we step back and connect all these dots, the hypersecure quantum networks, the AI force multipliers, the liquid fifth-order cybernetics, it leaves us with a truly provocative reality to consider.
Okay, lay it on us.
We are intentionally building cybernetic networks that mimic biological processes. Autopoiesis, coevolution, structural adaptability. We are creating digital ecosystems that act like living entities specifically to defend against the existential quantum threats we discussed at the top of the show.
Right. To survive the mathematical brute force of Q-Day, the static network has to evolve. It has to become alive.
But if we succeed in making synthetic networks that truly mimic biological life, will they eventually develop biological vulnerabilities?
What do you mean?
Could the hypersecure, quantum-entangled Internet of Tomorrow suffer not from traditional hacking or brute force code breaking, but from digital autoimmune diseases? What happens when a network's own evolutionary collective intelligence becomes confused by a novel stimulus, perhaps a bizarre AI-generated attack pattern, and mistakenly begins to attack and dismantle its own infrastructure?
Oh, wow.
As we build technology that is indistinguishable from a living ecosystem, we may have to completely redefine cybersecurity. We won't be patching bugs in code. We will be treating pathologies in a living system.
A digital autoimmune disease. That is a terrifying, brilliant, and deeply humbling thought to end on. We thought we were building better machines, but we might just be building a new form of life with its own set of biological flaws. To you listening, thank you for coming on this incredibly deep, complex journey with us today. Keep questioning the reality of the technology shaping your world, because as we've seen, that reality is shifting faster than the speed of light.